All right, let's just dive right in. I want you to imagine something for a second, but don't think of it as a history lesson. Think of it like a movie pitch. You've got this ordinary university professor, right? He's in a small, kind of remote town. He's got no army, no money, and really his only weapon is a pen. And with that pen, he decides he's going to single-handedly challenge the two most powerful people in the entire world, the Holy Roman Emperor and God's literal representative on earth, the Pope. I mean, it sounds like pure Hollywood fiction, but 500 years ago, a German monk named Martin Luther, he did exactly that. And the really wild part is that he didn't just manage to avoid getting burned at the stake, he actually tore a massive, permanent rift across the entire continent of Europe. So how in the world did one man with one very powerful idea manage to completely upend 1,000 years of authority? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down. So where does this huge, world-changing storm even begin? Well, the origin was actually something incredibly worldly. To be blunt, it was all about money. See, in the early 16th century, the church in Rome needed a ton of cash to build the magnificent St. Peter's Basilica. So they set out these, super salesmen to sell a very special product everywhere. That product was called an indulgence.
And the marketing for this was, in its own way, kind of brilliant. The most famous salesman of the time, a guy named Johann Tetzel, had this incredibly catchy advertising jingle. It was a simple, direct promise. The very moment your coin clinks in the collection box, your loved one's soul flies free from purgatory. And let me tell you, it was wildly effective.
Now, to really get why Luther was so mad, you have to understand what an indulgence was. It was a piece of paper, basically a certificate, that promised to shorten the time you or a relative had to spend in purgatory. But for Martin Luther, the sound of those coins dropping was just agonizing. He was watching poor believers spend the money they needed for food on this piece of paper, all for what he saw as an empty guarantee. His anger just hit a boiling point. For him, this wasn't just some scam, it was a deep, profound insult to God.
And that anger, that righteous anger, it pushed him to do something. It led to one of the most famous moments in all of Western history. It's October 31st, 1517. That's the eve of All Saints' Day, a huge religious holiday. And Luther grabs a hammer, some nails, and a document, and he walks right up to the main entrance of the castle church in Wittenberg.
But here's something you have to understand about his original goal. The document he nailed up was his 95 Theses, basically a list of 95 points he wanted to discuss, and it was written in Latin. He wasn't trying to start a revolution. He just wanted to invite other scholars and theologians for a formal academic debate about indulgences. That's it.
But, history had other plans. Thanks to the high tech of the day, the Gutenberg printing press, what should have been a quiet local debate went completely viral. His invitation gets translated from academic Latin into everyday German, it's printed, and bam! Within 2 weeks, it's everywhere in Germany. Why? Because it tapped into this deep feeling of resentment many Germans had against the financial and political power of a pope based in Italy. What was supposed to be a scholarly discussion instantly turned into an open declaration of war against the church. As you can imagine, the authorities were not happy. Things escalated, and they escalated fast. By 1521, Luther was summoned to appear before the Imperial Diet, which is this huge formal assembly in a city called Worms. This was it. This was the point of no return. The scene itself was just pure drama. I mean, it was like an ant standing in front of an elephant. On one side of the room, you have the most powerful men in Europe, cardinals in their incredible, magnificent robes, and the young, ambitious Emperor Charles V. And on the other side, there's just Luther, alone, dressed in a simple, rough monk's habit. They pointed to a pile of his books sitting on a table and gave him this stark ultimatum. No debate, no discussion. He had two choices: take back everything he had written or be declared a heretic, which meant he would be hunted down and burned at the stake. The entire hall just fell silent, everyone waiting for this one lone monk to finally bow his head. But he didn't. Instead, after taking a day to think it over, Luther took a deep breath and spoke the words that would literally shake history. "Here I stand, I can do no other, God help me." In that one moment, for the first time, the idea of an individual's conscience stood taller than 1,000 years of institutional authority. It was a turning point for the entire Western world. And believe it or not, the story gets even more dramatic from here. So Luther is declared an outlaw. On his way home from Worms, a group of masked knights on horseback ambush his wagon, they snatch him, and they just vanish into the forest. All of Europe thought he was dead,
They assumed he'd been captured and killed, but this was actually a brilliant piece of political theater. The whole kidnapping was staged by his powerful protector, a guy named Frederick the Wise. Luther was secretly whisked away to the secluded Wartburg Castle, where he grew a big beard and lived under the alias Knight George.
And it was during this time, this sort of house arrest, that Luther did what was maybe his most revolutionary act of all. He took on the massive job of translating the New Testament into German, the language that ordinary people actually spoke. This was a total game changer. It meant that for the first time ever, regular folks didn't need a priest to tell them what God was saying. They could read it and they could interpret it for themselves. He had just broken the church's monopoly on truth itself.
But here's the thing about revolutions. Once you unleash a revolutionary idea, it is incredibly hard to control where it goes. Luther's ideas about spiritual freedom soon spiraled into consequences that he never intended and that he absolutely could not contain.
His call for freedom from the Pope's authority was interpreted by thousands of peasants as a call for freedom from their feudal lords, and this sparked the massive and incredibly bloody German Peasants' War. Seeing all this chaos, Luther, who was actually pretty conservative at heart, sided with the nobility and called for the violent crushing of the rebellion, a move that cost him a lot of his early supporters among the common people.
And his revolution wasn't just theological, it became deeply personal. He didn't just call for getting rid of monasteries, he practiced what he preached. He got married to Katharina von Bora, a former nun who had escaped her convent. Legend has it she was smuggled out in an empty fish barrel. I mean, think about it. A monk marrying a nun. In those days, this was a shocking, direct defiance of the sacred Catholic vow of celibacy.
So when Martin Luther finally died in 1546, the changes he had started were permanent. There was simply no going back for Europe. The Western Christian world was now officially split in two, and it created a schism that has never, ever healed.
And the immediate result wasn't peace or enlightenment, it was conflict. This deep division between the new Protestant faiths and the traditional Catholic Church ignited over 100 years of brutal, devastating religious wars across the entire continent. So as you can see, the question of his legacy is incredibly complex.
Which, of course, leads to the central debate about the man himself. Was he a hero who liberated human thought, who championed the individual's conscience and broke the chains of a corrupt system? Or was he a historical sinner, a man whose stubbornness shattered the unity of Europe and unleashed generations of bloodshed and division?
So what was he? A liberator of faith? A sinner of division? Or maybe just a stubborn, bull-headed monk who happened to be the right person at exactly the right time to smash open the doors of the Middle Ages? Whether you end up seeing him as a hero or a heretic, one thing you absolutely can't deny is his impact, and that is something worth thinking about.